Today, I really want to revisit the Disney animated series The Owl House. This show was a surprise hit and a surprise deviation from the family-friendly tone that Disney Channel was known for, with its heavy focus on witches, demons, and alternative identities and relationships. Today, I want to talk about what made me fall in love with the show as it was first airing, but also the really interesting real-life mythology that inspired the show, the real demons, gods, spirits, and just general lore that made the show what it is. The Owl House, in my opinion, is a show that is really about its characters, and when it comes to its key characters for the mythological narrative, we find a recurring theme that each of them are a different version of the same fallen angel narrative found all over the world, from King to Bellos to the Collector, and even Luz herself. So let's break it all down. The Owl House's premise to me always felt like animated Harry Potter for girls, with a heavier focus on demons. Obviously, it's not the plot of Harry Potter with just these themes, but watching this animated series even as an adult reminded me of what it was like to first get into Harry Potter as a child, to discover this alternate fantasy world where everything was familiar but also just magical. The series focused on its main character, Luz Nocita, a fantasy-loving girl from the human world who just doesn't fit in at school. After being forced to go to summer camp, Luz manages to accidentally slip into another dimension entirely. A dimension filled with witches, demons, and monsters, where magic is very real, and all the people live on the decaying flesh of a giant beast known as the Titan. Luz is more used to the children's safe fantasy genre like Harry Potter itself, and doesn't quite realize that this magic world can also be seen as hell, a place of demons and boiling oceans. But because of her love for magic and desire to somehow be a witch, Luz decides to stay in this land for the summer and teach herself magic while living with a powerful witch outside of normal witch society. It was a charming premise designed to set Luz up to explore this giant titan and the different creatures that live there, as well as their insane magic system. When it first started, I honestly didn't expect the show to get too deep, as the first episode was mostly just hysterical jokes and setting up the basic plot for Luz living with the wild witch Ida Clawthorne out in the Owl House. Early on, the most interesting part of the Owl House was learning about its internal lore, basically the way that its own magic worked. This was fun because unlike other shows with magic systems, even the most advanced witches weren't entirely sure how magic worked in the Owl House. This is due to the fact that the Boiling Isles is home to naturally magic creatures, and thus it's not something that actually had to be understood in order to be used, any more than ancient humans had to understand how their own internal organs worked in order for them to operate. In the human realm, a witch is just anyone, even a human, who is said to perform magic, but in the Owl House, a witch is basically the Boiling Isles equivalent of the term human. It's a word that refers to the basic sapient species of the Boiling Isles, and it's from these two different ideas that a lot of the early issues stem from. At first, Ida took Luz into her home knowing full well that Luz is human, and thus that she couldn't actually teach her magic, but she thought she could at least get some free labor out of the situation before succumbing to the role of magic mother to Luz and her gang of friends. Once Luz realized this, however, she wasn't disheartened, as she was sure she could figure out how magic works to harness it for herself. Now, as time went on, we would learn that there are other ways to harness magic to cast the exact same spells as a witch does, such as using a wand or staff carved from palistrum wood. You see, Ida explained very early on that witches and other magical creatures have a magical bile sac in their heart that secretes magic fluid. This is burnt up by the witch as they cast a spell, which manifests with them drawing a blank circle in the air. This magic manifests as a light to create the circle and then turns into the spell that the witch was imagining. This is harder than it looks, as the witches have to train the process of channeling their bile into magic, and even after that, each spell requires a process of slowly understanding how exactly that spell works. Witches aren't the only magical beings, however, and even plant life can be naturally magical, including the palistrum trees that once could be found all over the Boiling Isles. Due to overharvesting, these trees have become nearly extinct, but the witches couldn't help but harvest them to this point because of how powerful they are. And of course, we would later find out that Emperor Bellos was also eating a lot of these so that they couldn't be used for multiple generations, using their magic in order to sustain his life. In the show, magic is revealed to come directly from the Great Titan himself. It's from his rotting corpse that all the different species of the Boiling Isles would rise out of, instead of evolving slowly from microscopic organisms like we imagine here on Earth. The palistrum trees were not just able to produce magic the way that the witches did, but in excess, even when cut down and carved. When carved, these trees actually take on a second life by becoming a palisman. These are shaped to be animals and generally enjoy the idea of being an assistant and faithful servant to a witch, despite this process leading to the tree's near extinction. Though again, we really might want to blame Belos more for that than anything. These palismen make cute pets, but they also provide epic amounts of magic beyond what a witch can provide with their own heart, and because of that, non-magical entities are able to cast the exact same spells using a palisman, or even a smaller training wand carved from palistrum wood. You don't have to evolve in the Boiling Isles to understand the way magic works, and a human can imagine the spells, however difficult they may be, the same way a witch does. All they lack is the natural access to magic. Because of this, Luz can learn magic and compete just as well with any witch in theory, but early on, the use of wands and palisman staffs is treated as something Luz shouldn't invest too much in. This could have been simply because Ida was well aware of how rare palismen were these days, and in the end, Ida had to steal some palisman wood in order to make sure that Luz got her own. But it's also just a bit dangerous to hand this off to someone like Luz without any real experience. Ultimately, not just giving Luz one of these wands in order to let her feel like a witch was a good thing, as it's what led her to actually understand the source of magic outside of the Titan's bile. You see, witches did eventually evolve in order to have that bile sac, but before that, they had to do another version of magic. Luz discovers this when first recording Ida casting a spell, when her camera ends up just a little bit damaged, and shows something within the magic circle that we don't see normally. By rewatching Ida casting the basic light spell by drawing a circle in the air, she's able to see a moment where it glitches out and reveals an entire symbol that she can draw onto another surface and use in order to cast the same spell, a very simple ball of light. From here, Luz would realize that these glyphs aren't random, but they're hidden within natural elements that surround the world of the Boiling Isles. In snowflakes, for instance, Luz finds a glyph that can be used to create snow. Within flowers, she finds the signs for a plant glyph, and eventually a sign for fire as well. Even the sign of light, Luz realizes was always in the sky above the Boiling Isles and a constellation above the stars, explaining how the ancient witches would have found these glyphs originally before they could learn how to just draw a simple circle in the air. The show wasn't about Luz finding more and more glyphs for random spells, however, and later on it was explained that these 4 glyphs were actually the only 4 natural spells that there are in the world. This makes sense, as Ida explained when first teaching Luz the light spell that it's the first and most basic spell that a witch learns. Even without the glyphs, witches would first develop the power to conquer the elements basically, to harness light, fire, earth, and ice or water to achieve the very basic goals of their early lifestyles. Over time, the first complex spells would just be a combination of these glyphs being done to do more intricate things as we see in the show, with a single circle drawn in the air, having within it both fire and ice, to create steam like we see Luz do for instance. Luz realized she could combine 2 or more glyphs within a circle to create more complex spells, and later Lilith would say that the glyphs seem to act more like a network for the ideas of the person casting the spell, a form to channel what they want through. Thus, even though the same glyph combination would have the same effect for 2 different people, they could each shape things in their own way, such as they do frequently with magic ice sculptures created from the glyphs. This is one of the more interesting magic systems I've seen, even if it left a lot of fans with certain questions. But it gave us a fun little system to explore for Luz and her friends in a world that looked like a generic fantasy on the surface with some demonic tones mashed in. They basically took pointy-eared elves, called them witches, and then built a magic system that had literally evolved over time for the witch's biological form to harness. Over time, Luz got used to Ida's palisman more and more, and even got her own near the end as well, but it felt more earned with her finding the entire hidden history of magic before receiving this. This slower approach to magic also seemed to reshape Luz, taking her from someone who is impatient and a bit hasty, to someone who has to think things out in order to achieve her greater goal. Without that, even using a training wand was shown to be extremely dangerous, with Luz firing off a fireball at random and causing problems in the Boiling Isles kneecap. Now, as far as real-life mythology goes, cool symbols claiming to do magical things is something that dates back to the ancient past. But these days, most people tend to remember the more recent anime, Full Metal Alchemist, which featured similarly styled symbols within circles to create an outcome. Like in the Owl House, the more complex designs can create different outcomes, with the Owl House even having a similar system where changing one small part of a glyph can alter what happens. But although alchemy is considered a mixture of science with magic, the real-life alchemical drawings tended to be a lot more complex and contain scenes as opposed to just symbols. The Owl House glyphs and even the alchemical circles from Full Metal Alchemist are a lot more reminiscent of the demonic seals from the Judeo-Christian tradition. These were symbols that were meant to help summon and control fallen angels or demons to do your bidding. Before Judaism, many of these seals and their names would be used to invoke different gods from various regions. In both cases, the entity is supposed to help you by praying to the name on the seal, but Judaism treats the relationship like it's an evil entity to be conquered instead of an angel to pray to. with the gods of every other religion in Judaism being seen as fallen angels. This makes an extra sense in the Owl House, where the Boiling Isles is also known as a realm of demons, with all the inhabitants living on one giant decomposing demon who gives off magic essence as he is slowly boiled in the ocean. While Luce discovering the origins of the magic system is great, part of the ignorance of the Boiling Isles witches does seem to be imposed upon them by their evil Emperor Belos, which is where we really begin to get into the fallen angel story with our first character. Emperor Belos is the long-living emperor of the Boiling Isles, who rules in a way that is treated as friendly or even messianic, but which is very clearly dark and oppressive to anyone who gets remotely close to Belos. Those with a weaker conscience tend to last the longest around Belos, and the more a person reflects on their own emotional state, the less likely they are to handle being his lackey for too long, something we see with multiple characters. In particular, this is a problem with the Golden Guards that Emperor Belos creates, who all end up defecting and having to be disposed of just for Belos to create another. Belos is claimed to be a natural resident of the Boiling Isles and claims that he speaks to the Titan directly despite its decomposing state. Through campaigning and showmanship, Belos was able to rise to power while limiting the power of everyone else. This makes him a pretty creepy villain for a kid's cartoon due to the complexity of his plan and how long it took for him to play it out. He's not someone who comes in to destroy you with force if he doesn't have the manpower, but that doesn't mean he isn't going to try another way. Originally, Emperor Belos was a human from the 1700s. This makes him a character that isn't just from a time of American colonization, but he's really supposed to embody that entire movement. Belos actually came from the same hometown as Luce, a creepy place known as Gravesfield due to the strange graves that already existed on the land before the settlers arrived. They would preserve the graveyard by claiming the surrounding land as their own, not realizing that these graves were actually burial spots for witches from the demon realm. The interdimensional portal had been used to transport witches' bodies here after their deaths, allowing for more burials without losing space on the limited body of the Boiling Isles Titan. In his human life, Belos was known as Philip Whittabane. As Philip, he was raised with his brother Caleb in a time where witches were being hunted, a very famous part of American history where real-life people were accused, tortured, and executed over the claim of witchcraft. In the show, these aren't just innocent human victims, but also real witches from the Boiling Isles, with Gravesfield being a rather common spot in particular for witches to cross over. But it's implied that the entire witch-hunting movement was inspired by real witches from the demon realm that were then hunted down, followed by innocent humans who got mixed up within that. It's because of this that when Philip ended up in the Boiling Isles, he decided he needed to do something to stop all of the witches. Once he realized they were truly a force from a horrifying realm of monsters, he wanted to stop them before they realized just how powerful they were and tried to conquer the Earth the way he tries to conquer the Boiling Isles. In Philip's mind, this was a defensive act, but it was taking out an entire species, or really multiple other species, all just so that he could feel safe. Witches and demons can be ferocious, don't get me wrong, but by the end of the series, the point was more so to paint them as innocent entities who just want to be peaceful. It's important to remember that without wanting to be peaceful and without wanting to be good, that the witches couldn't have been tricked by Belos' dark plan. Despite being from the human realm, Belos was able to adapt to the Boiling Isles well enough that he could claim to be not just a resident of the Isles, but the chosen prophet that connects to the Titan himself. This is not something that the witches believe at first, as the witches that Belos met seem to think of the Titan as being dead beyond even some sort of spiritual reach, just a dead planet to live on top of. But when presented with the idea that the Titan is still alive in some way, and worse, upset by how the witches are using their power, they were quick to adopt any system that they thought would make the Titan pleased with them. To get to this point, Belos had to uncover the system of glyph magic that existed in the Isles, and work his way towards a mysterious entity locked away known as the Collector. This is an ancient, childlike spirit who understands the nature of magic and the world around them better than anyone else in the physical reality, it seems. But the Collector's youthfulness makes them use it for selfish reasons. What the Collector wants is to be set free so that they can play, though the Collector's version of play should be noted to end in the death of everyone around him because of their immense power. But as far as Belos is concerned, he can just claim to set the Collector free in exchange for the information on magic that the Collector has, and then he can just ditch the Collector at the last moment. Essentially what we see in the finale of Season 2. These magics that the Collector teaches to Belos allows him to restrict the power of the witches until an event called the Day of Unity, where he intends to steal all the magic from the witches in one massive ceremony. In addition to this, Belos was also able to lengthen his own life by eating the essence of Palisman. To trick people into giving up their magic, Belos coined the term wild magic to make the witches who wield their natural power feel like they are inferior or uncivilized. In order to stop using wild magic, which Belos claims the Titan hates, you need to restrict your magic by joining one of the major covens. By choosing one of these systems, your magic is artificially limited down to spells that fit within that particular field. There were 9 open covens, each representing a different industry, such as Willow getting into the Plant Coven, Gus getting into the Illusion Coven, and Amity in the Abomination Coven. There was even a 10th special coven for only the elite witches that gave them access to all forms of magic in order to work for Emperor Belos himself. Even this seal was important, however, as the seals were designed not just to restrict magic, but eventually life force. This was a slow, multi-generational con job, where Belos was able to convince just a few people at first to adopt his magic system, and over time more and more witches would see that and join themselves or let their own children join. After getting control of one town and then another, and then the basic government of the Isles, and then being in control of the school systems, he was basically able to guide every witch into this system. The goal of Belos came together in the Season 2 finale, where he had gathered all the witches together for his Day of Unity, where he intended to activate the seals in order to kill everyone and cut off their magic. Until then, Belos was able to restrain the power of the majority so they can't rise against him, and make it feel safe for later generations to join the Coven system and leave the wild witches behind. Only when enough witches had joined would it be safe for Belos to pull off his plan and end the witches as a species. Now, I explained before that each of the key figures we discuss in today's video will have some version of the fallen angel narrative, but each can be said to represent different figures or at least a different perspective on that same idea. A fallen angel is technically a broad term that can refer to a lot of different figures, and in the larger spiritual tradition, angels are presented as needing to have a series of falls and rises as part of their natural life cycle. In the earlier mythological tradition, however, fallen angels also refer to figures who fell to the earth due to sin or who fell to the earth in order to sin. The key sin described for the fallen angels in Judaism, for instance, is giving the gifts of forbidden knowledge to humans. This is claimed to lead humans into a greater death by presenting them with knowledge that seems helpful but ultimately hurts them in the end, including the forbidden knowledge of certain magics in the Book of Enoch. Belos is an interesting figure because he hasn't fallen from what we think of as heaven, but is a human who fell into the Boiling Isles. From the Boiling Isles perspective, he would be a figure that fell into their world, and the depiction of the Boiling Isles as something of a hell or underworld does make 1700s America seem a bit like a heavenly dimension in comparison. And there are things that Belos does that seem to paint him as a fallen angel or a Luciferian type figure. The most obvious example for this is the logo of the Emperor's Coven, which is a pyramid with a sword laid over it. The way these line up, the symbol is meant to look like 2 triangles intersecting, which is popularly used as the Star of David in Judaism, but also the Freemason logo, which, like with the seal to the Emperor's Coven, is made using different shapes and tools instead of just bare outlines. The show thus tends to lean in visually to the idea that it's meant to be a Freemason logo, however it does so in a very layered way. For those who don't know, Freemasonry is legally a charitable fraternity that has members all over the globe and has for hundreds of years now. And even a lot of our founding fathers in America were Freemasons. The accusation against Freemasonry from conspiracy theorists had always been that they were an organization trying to control the world, and in the crazier fringe theories, lead that world into destruction or enslavement. This is the same thing Belos is presented as doing in the show, with his logo more closely matching the Freemason logo than the Star of David. This is due to the fraternity's origins as a brotherhood for masons or architects. They also, however, tried to preserve the tradition of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, with this ceremony meant to mirror the initiation performed for ancient Egyptian pharaohs. It's because of this that Freemasonry often alludes to the construction of the pyramids in its public imagery, something found even today on our American dollars with their depiction of the pyramids. Thus, the pyramid becomes the first symbol in the Emperor's Coven, perhaps even hinting that he was a Freemason back in his life on Earth, with the second image being laid over this being a sword. This is where things start to get actually Luciferian, as the sword is considered one of the greatest symbols of forbidden knowledge, perhaps second only to the forbidden fruit of knowledge from the Garden of Eden story. In the Book of Enoch, the fallen angels who misled the world are explained as doing so with various forbidden knowledges that corrupt people over time. The worst of these angels was known as Azazel, who was said to teach the art of metalsmithing, which in turn led to the creation of bladed weapons, or swords. Traditionally, the art of metalsmithing is presented in the Bible as being taught by the descendant of Cain, Tubal-Cain, though he isn't described as creating weapons. Cain's line as a whole is known for creating the first ever city and many larger settlements, and the first tools created by their line would have been used for construction. Over time, however, that knowledge was said to be twisted to create weapons that could hurt others much worse than the blunt instruments that would have been used in the past. While the desire to kill would have always existed within humans, it is the art of metalsmithing that makes it dangerous because it leads to killing happening on mass scale, such as we see in the Owl House. The Egyptians are considered to be the most misled by the fallen angels in the Jewish tradition, leading to them building great structures such as the pyramids. With the logo for the Emperor's Coven, what we end up getting is a two-part plan. The first, the pyramid, represents the building of the Boiling Isles, or rather, the conquering of it. Then the sword represents their eventual destruction, all building it up just to kill them. This makes it the perfect hidden symbol right in the face of the Boiling Isles witches to really tell them what is going to happen. It's honestly kind of wild that this isn't a Disney cartoon, but what's even more wild is that the comparisons don't end there. Now, while Masonry is claimed to model its teachings after the ancient Egyptian mystery schools, the accusation from outside of Freemasonry is that it's just Gnosticism in a different form. Gnosticism was a movement from the early centuries of Christianity that emphasized the idea that the Old Testament God was actually a lower spiritual entity controlling the world for evil purposes. This figure was called the demiurge, meaning architect, because he's the one who constructed the physical world as we know it. This figure doesn't realize that there are beings above him with greater power, however, and because of that, he has managed to accidentally trap their light in human form to limit it into a shape that can worship him. Already, you can see the parallels to Belos here, who thinks it's his destiny to conquer the world, or even worlds, and then when he finds beings with powers far beyond his, he immediately finds a way to restrain it and use it for his good. The demiurge wants to use the humans to worship him, just as Belos accomplishes as Emperor and Speaker to the Titan. The Freemasons are accused by fringe theorists of worshipping the demiurge themselves, pointing at the connection between architecture and masonry and the Gnostic idea of the architect, though outside of the accusations, this idea begins to really fall apart. Masonry was said to model its initiation system after that of ancient Egypt, as we said, but this is the same initiation system as Gnosticism. In Gnosticism, the goal is to escape the demiurge with its Gnostic ritual, which follows the story of Jesus and a new character known as Sophia. Jesus is of course known for his death and then resurrection on the cross. In order to preserve reverence for Jesus, however, the Gnostics had a ritual where Jesus is the one who rescues the initiate, as opposed to you playing Jesus yourself. Thus, you would become the figure known as Sophia. Sophia is Greek for wisdom, and it is Sophia who had fallen into human form in the Gnostic tales, having her light trapped within human flesh. It is by acting out the story of Sophia, presented in various texts, that the initiate would rise out of their body after death, and instead of reincarnating in flesh for the demiurge to rule over again, they would ascend to a higher heaven above him. The goal of the initiation ceremonies, even dating back to ancient Egypt, had always been to connect you with an ancestor spirit that allows you to get into heaven, regardless of which angel is guarding the actual gate. The Freemasons thus are part of a larger mystery school tradition that all present themselves as being against any sort of angel that is trying to control or capture the earth. In these systems, the idea of an enlightening figure is Jesus himself, someone who gives humans knowledge but for their greater benefit, not to mislead them. And that is something we will explore later with characters like Luce or even King. But before we get into that, we have to go into the story of the true demiurge figure within the show, the Collector. The Collector is probably my favorite character in the Owl House, and the one who most literally represents a fallen angel figure. The Collector looks very young, but is part of an immortal-seeming race of cosmic beings who don't have physical form in the way we normally think. As a species, these entities are referred to as the Archivists, and they are explained as beings that do what their name suggests, archiving creatures that they think are worth preserving. We see small examples of this in flashbacks in the show, such as we see that the owl beast that Ida actually transforms into started off as an actual owl beast that was roaming the world of the Boiling Isles. At some point, an archivist captured this beast by turning them into a scroll, which was meant to preserve the owl beast's form, but when washed up on shore later, this scroll was sold at the dark market and then used by Lilith in order to curse Ida into turning into the beast. The archivists generally exist in a cosmic form said to be powered by the stars, which in real life were said to be the angels that governed over humans in the ancient mythologies. These archivists would come down and take physical form where they could interact with the worlds more directly and create their preservation project. They have great power to control matter in this form, and even moving the moon is child's play for the child archivist that we see in the show, known as the Collector. But these archivists are not generally shown to use the power to stop disasters for different beings. Instead, they collect creatures to preserve them, even if the world might be dying out. Some beings in the different worlds became aware of the archivists, but began to treat them more like gods watching over them, as as we see in the collector's book describing the Archivist. This implies that even the humans would have seen the Archivist, as they would have traveled to Earth as well, influencing our mythology of angels watching over us. This work is considered very important for most of the Archivists, but the collector in the show is a fallen figure for a reason. Our Archivist, the collector, is much younger than the other Archivists that we see. Though we do see very little of them, they appear a lot more taller and ominous than our collector, who we could say is the youthful one among them. It's because of this that our collector doesn't really care for the work they do, and instead, he wants to interact with the world more directly in a childlike way to play with others. Part of the reason the Archivists tend to have a hands-off approach, however, is that their powers are so strong that they can cause catastrophic events if they aren't used right, and in general, the consequences of their interference are cosmic. Even when wise enough, one wrong move can change the entire history and development of a group, ruining the natural life cycles that they want to preserve the species from. These Archivists all have an interesting balance of light and dark in their design, sun and moon, or yin and yang, which has a strong root in the esoteric traditions surrounding gods or the angels. In the esoteric tradition, it is not an excess of light that helps one ascend, but a balance of dark and light, or yin and yang. This doesn't mean perfection, just balance, and in the esoteric traditions, you can have this balance while still needing to learn more to properly embrace your role. In Judaism, this is the case of the Jewish angel known as Metatron, who got assigned to watch over the Israelites. This is due to God not being someone that the humans can reach directly, but rather needing some sort of angelic intermediary. While the other nations were said to be led astray by their fallen angel intermediaries, such as described earlier with the Book of Enoch, Israel was said to receive an angel that was working directly for the one true God. This angel is important because in Judaism, Metatron is also known as the youth or the lad. This is because while the other angels, particularly the fallen angels, are presented as ancient beings, Metatron is said to be the youngest and newest angel in the heavens who had suddenly been elevated to the position of controller of the physical world. However, in Judaism, the connection to an angel is what they call the fruit of forbidden knowledge, as it's through the tree of forbidden knowledge of good and evil that the Kabbalistic tradition says that you connect to your God or your angel. What this means in the greater Jewish tradition is that their connection to the angels wasn't meant to happen until much later, as God's intent was for Adam and Eve not to connect to the angels for their own safety. What this led to was a world that is flawed, with an angel watching over it who is doing his best, but who in Judaism is claimed to have both good and evil within him. The figure Metatron. This is the figure that they call the Prince of the World, and the same figure that they call the Demiurge or Architect in Gnosticism. The collector fills the role of being the youth and the lad among the other cosmic creators, with him being given control of one world, the demon realm with the Boiling Isles. This leads to a flawed world where history and knowledge has been reshaped by his influence, before the Boiling Isles themselves even formed. Even more interestingly, the collector fills the role of Metatron not just by being a cosmic type entity, but also by being a figure specifically that mediates from his spiritual position with people on the physical plane to do his will. Not just Belos either, but the entire tribe of witches that he has brought together to become Titan hunters, as we see as well. Growing up in the cosmic realm, the collector always felt left out because the other archivists were too busy doing their actual jobs to play around and abuse their powers with them. While the archivists normally don't interfere with the development of a planet, one issue they found was that the demon realm had creatures that could fight against them, the Titans. The Titans are the dominant species on the planet in the demon realm, where the Boiling Isles eventually formed, with the Boiling Isles themselves just being the last living Titan besides King, who is of course revealed to be the last Titan alive and the son of the Boiling Isles Titan. Hence why, even as a baby, he knew that he was meant to be king. The Titans aren't just the dominant species in this realm, but also appear to be a protector species that in many ways is more of a biological version of the Archivists. Titans start at a very tiny size, but eventually grow to be extremely massive. While they are hard to kill, dying does appear to be part of their natural life cycle, meaning that they aren't intentionally immortal. When a Titan does die, however, its body begins to create an ooze from decomposition. And from this ooze, the various demonic entities rise up. Over time, the early monsters that come from this ooze terraform the Isles before later, more intelligent species begin to rise out of the goo, such as the witches. All of these species manifest in a larger form instead of starting out as microscopic, the way we imagine life starting on Earth for our different species. Thus, anytime a Titan dies, it doesn't just leave behind a son like the great Titan left behind King, but they also leave behind generations and generations of beings who all get to live, exist, and die out before one day returning on the body of another Titan. The purpose of this seems to be in part to preserve the other species, with the Titan's blood giving them interdimensional power to travel to other worlds and pick up species that they think are worth preserving. In addition to preserving these species, however, they also get to live to serve the Titan's child, who starts off in a form too tiny to survive in the Great Boiling Sea. The Titans seem to develop the desire to protect the people just as much as they need their people to protect their children, and it looks like it's a symbiotic relationship that is meant to be truly caring. Like a baby Titan, if there were no Titan corpses to live on, the other witches and demons would simply die in the boiling oceans as well. And the entire evolution of the Titan may have started as him just trying to preserve the species of his own island by letting smaller species live on top of him, before their entire world suddenly became covered in a boiling ocean. To once again prove the evolution is meant for the protection of other species, the Titans also evolve the power to fight against the Archivists, making them the one species that the Archivists actually fear. The Demon Realm does appear to be the natural home of the Titans, given the connection to magic and the natural glyphs that form around them, even in the constellations of the sky, which wouldn't be found except for maybe on another planet in the same solar system. Ultimately, there seems to be some commentary in the way that these two preserve the species differently. The Titans were presented as maybe being evil at first, but later being revealed to actually be the heroes of this universe, wanting to have species not just preserved, but living their natural lives together. Whereas the Archivists don't really care if any of the worlds die out themselves, and just want to preserve the species in their archives where they don't actually ever get to come out in some functional form, existing just as paper for the Archivists or as toys for the collector. In the ancient past, there would have been many Titans on this planet, each raising their own children to replace them and becoming a land for their people to live upon. In order to get rid of the Titans, but also get rid of their childish collector, the Archivists tricked our collector into taking physical form in the Demon Realm, where the Titans could potentially kill him. While down there, the collector indicates that the other Archivists began killing the different Titans so that it would all be blamed on the collector. It's possible our collector also killed some Titans with their wild play, but they explained in the final episode that the last Titan, King's father, had blamed our collector for killing all of the Titans but him. So it would seem that the Archivists used the collector as a distraction while they covertly killed the other Titans, and then hoped that the last Titan would kill their annoying collector kid. This reflects the mindset of Belos, with both the Archivists and Belos seeing any species that is too advanced as needing to be wiped out so that they cannot compete with them. Anything that can't compete with them is to be preserved for history, leading to a world where all that exists is the most supreme power and the things they deemed worthy of having as trophies of their existence. Proof that they have other smaller beings that they have control over. What's interesting, however, is that the childishness of the collector made it so that all they really wanted was to play with other beings. The problem is that the collector is so powerful that even Titans risk death fighting such a small one. And for most of the series, the collector just doesn't really care if other people die or suffer in order for them to have fun. The collector doesn't want to be evil per se, but they don't understand morality in any real way. As an archivist, they've only ever had to care about themselves, and whatever gets destroyed along the way just seems like the natural order to them if it happens. The collector essentially just can't rationalize a life mattering if they are so easily killed. Essentially the exact same way that humans look at the life of a bug as opposed to a mammal or even other humans. Larger animals we tend to hesitate to kill too quickly, even when we see them as our natural prey for food, but even a vegetarian who cares about animal rights can kill a bug rather casually. It's an instant, easy thing that can be done with your shoe or with a swat of your hand, and even by accident. And that is the same relationship that the archivists have with the rest of the beings. Now, by the end of the series, we would learn that the collector does have a great potential for good, but they essentially don't have their own needs met. Needs that they would need met in order to start thinking about the needs of others. Because of that, even though they are a master of manipulation in some forms, characters like Belos are still able to manipulate the collector in return, really leading the collector on until the Day of Unity with the promise that he'd help the collector escape from his ethereal prison. It is because of this that the collector also has strong connections to the Gnostic demiurge. In Gnosticism, the Old Testament God is not treated as the one true God that Jesus descends from, but instead the demiurge is presented as an intermediary angel that God assigned to Israel in the book of Exodus. In this book, God doesn't just assign that angel, but he warns the Israelites that this angel contains his name within it. This is important because in the later Jewish tradition, it's explained that the name of God in the Old Testament can be used to refer either to God himself or to the intermediary Metatron, since they share the same name. This is common in the early Hebrew language, where words could refer to different entities based on the context of the story. The Gnostics assigned the actions of the Old Testament God that they perceived as negative to Metatron, or the Demiurge, thus leaving the one true God as more of a blameless source of divinity that Jesus can speak for. The association of the Old Testament God with the Gnostic Demiurge includes parts of the Bible such as the Ten Commandments, where the Old Testament God says that he is a jealous God and that there would be no other gods before him. The Gnostics believe that only the one true God is the one to be worshipped, but not because he was jealous, and that jealousy in the Bible was seen as Metatron wanting to use his name to replace the one true God. As inspiration for the show, this led to an interesting figure in the Collector who ended up hunting down the Titans to extinction, trying to play games with them, leaving behind one last rotting Titan to become the Boiling Isles and one last baby Titan in the form of King. King's father knew that he was contending with a powerful entity, so instead of fighting to live, he used his death as a way to trap the Collector just outside of their reality. From here, the Collector was forced to watch the development of the Boiling Isles from the shadows, waiting for someone else to find him and set him free. This was of course Belos who found him, who infiltrated the Boiling Isles, uncovered the history that even the witches had not discovered, and managed to find the prison of the Collector. Instead of setting him free in that moment, however, Belos promised to use leftover Titan's blood after the Day of Unity to milk the Collector for his useful knowledge for as long as possible. The Collector believed Belos until the Day of Unity, when Belos revealed he was betraying the Collector after having everything seemingly set up for the death of all witches and the return of Belos to his home. All of this happened in the Season 2 finale, which felt like a series finale the way it had been built up, but with Belos' plan nearing its completion, we were only just beginning to transition to the real villain through the Collector. With Belos' plan in place, there wasn't much hope to stop the Day of Unity ritual to kill the witches, but Belos throwing the Collector's prison away meant that King himself could find it and let the Collector out. It was Titan's blood that the Collector needed after all in order to escape his prison, which meant King was able to pull the Collector out with ease, even though he knew it was a bad idea. At the time, it was the only way to save everyone's lives, however, and while it led to the Collector completely taking over the Boiling Isles afterward, it did at least stop them from dying in that moment by transitioning them into an even weirder problem. All of this is what led to the third and final season of The Owl House, a season cut tragically short and turned into 3 40-minute specials to try and give them a chance to wrap up their story. And it's here where we see the fallen angel mythology come to its peak with Luz Nocida. Now, like Belos, Luz is a human who fell from the human realm into the demon realm, giving her the same basic pattern of being a fallen angel type figure. However, her symbolism for this doesn't begin to truly blossom until about Season 3. It's actually after returning to Earth and leaving behind the Boiling Isles that Luz begins to really mature and realize what a powerful and serious figure she has become. In the 3 specials that would wrap up her story, we saw her help her friends adjust to the human realm, return to the Boiling Isles to try and rescue the others, and even actually connect to the Titan, King's father, the same thing that Belos lied about originally. This gives Luz a sense of divinity in a way, doing the thing that Belos had claimed originally made him godlike in the Boiling Isles. Now, despite coming back to the Boiling Isles and finding it controlled by the Collector, it would turn out that the Collector isn't the ultimate villain of the series, but like before, Belos became the villain again by manipulating the Collector to make things even worse than the Collector had already managed to do. Belos did this in his new sludgy form by taking over one of the toys that the Collector had made out of Rain Whispers, pretending to be the preserved image of Rain brought to life by the Collector's kindness. It was a fairy tale explanation to appeal to the Collector's desire to be seen as great, but also well-meaning, using the mindset that the Collector already has that he is a good person and doesn't need to worry about how he treats others. By manipulating the Collector in this form, Belos tricks them into thinking that King actually wants to end the Collector's life instead of simply canceling out his magic. Luz is still able to reach the Collector emotionally, as Luz started off a lot like the Collector, someone who felt unwanted by other people in her life, while she just wanted to run away and play. In that time, however, Belos is able to take his goopy self to the Titan's heart and take control of the entire corpse this way, setting the stage for the final battle where Luz truly becomes what we think of as a fallen angel. To start this transformation into the fallen angel figure, Season 3 had Luz's palisman hatching and taking on an animal form. Luz's personality is one that is adaptable, or even more so just morphable, and because of that, her palisman is able to take the form of many different animals, but its primary form is called a snake shifter, which is just a snake that can shapeshift. This was something hinted at all the way back in episode 1, with Luz holding a snake in one hand and an Azura action figure in the other, coming full circle with Luz having her own witch outfit and a snake palisman staff, just as the second to last episode of the series ends, getting her ready for her full form in the final episode. The serpent is famously the giver of forbidden knowledge in the first real story of the Bible right after the 6 days of creation, the Garden of Eden narrative. In later Kabbalistic texts like the Zohar, the serpent is explicitly described as being the form that the fallen angel, Samael, also known as Satan, rides upon in order to deceive Adam and Eve. However, Luz is not an evil enlightenment figure, but a positive one who gives knowledge trying to help, even if it sometimes leads to negative consequences, like when she helped Belos as Philip Whittabane while time traveling. It's because of this that Luz is meant to look like the pagan depictions of the Lucifer figure, even sharing the same root word in the name. Luz means light, which comes from the earlier Latin lus, meaning light, and the root of Lucifer, meaning light bringer. This was the name of a god in the Roman tradition who was used to represent Venus, known for rising before the sun each morning and thus looking like they are bringing the light of the sun behind them. In Isaiah 14 within the Bible, however, the Hebrew equivalent of Venus, Hillel ben Shahar, or Dawn, son of morning, is framed as being a much more negative figure, one often associated with Satan or the misleading knowledge giver. However, while Judaism tends to condemn the knowledge giver or light bringer, it's important to remember that this figure was said to mislead the other nations into worshipping him. Because of this, the pagan tradition often holds the knowledge-giving gods to be heroes, even if they are also punished by more powerful gods, such as we see with Prometheus being punished by Zeus for giving forbidden knowledge to humans. It's because of that the Gnostic tradition holds that the knowledge giver isn't just a hero, but is actually Jesus himself, the one who is meant to die and come back to life in order to save everyone else. Jesus isn't just presented as the serpent in Gnosticism, but rather in the Apocryphon of John, he explains that the serpent is a symbol meant to make him look evil when he is just giving knowledge. This becomes the story of Luz in the show, as the final episode becomes about Luz making the ultimate sacrifice to defeat Belos, dying, but then also coming back to life thanks to the power of the Titan. And that's where all these connections start to get shockingly deep. In episode 3, Luz won the Collector over as a friend instead of trying to defeat them. But this is what leads to her downfall when Belos tried to use the Titan's power to kill the Collector outright. Luz jumped in the way of this and was destroyed in such a way that even the Collector is not able to bring her back. This teaches the Collector about empathy finally, but only after finally having a real loss that they can't make the choice to undo. When Luz dies, she fittingly dissolves into a ball of light, and when she dies, she's pulled back from a fade into darkness by none other than King's father. Here, we learn that King's father had been watching from a dimension in between the worlds, a place that Luz once found when trying to create a portal door back home. The Titans have blood that fuels interdimensional travel, but like with the Collectors, this can also make them exist somewhat outside of time. This is not permanent, as King's father isn't meant to stay in this dimension, but it's a place he is able to stay to watch over his son for the time being. He had really been watching over the entire Boiling Isles, as it was revealed by the Collector that the Titan only shows the glyphs to people he likes, and he tries to hide them from people like Belos and of course the Collector. By giving up the last of his power, King's father is able to send Luz back to the living world in a demonic or fallen angel form, but one that has mastery of Titan magic that Belos simply can't compete with even while controlling the corpse of the Titan. All of this goes back to the original Mystery School legend, the initiation of the ancient Egyptians that we talked about before. This initiation was believed to connect the pharaohs specifically to their ancestor spirit, who was said to be the first pharaoh of Egypt, the god Osiris. According to the Egyptian myth, Osiris was killed by his brother Set, the god of the Canaanite desert north of Egypt. This is the same region that Judaism would later grow out of, where they would adapt the story of Set, or Baal in their religion, into the story of the Old Testament god. In the ritual initiation of the pharaohs, the initiate reenacted the death of Osiris as well as his resurrection, though this was only a momentary resurrection in order to impregnate his wife and leave behind an heir. This momentary resurrection, however, led to Osiris not passing on entirely, but becoming a god in the afterlife. By doing this, he can watch over Egypt and in particular his son Horus, who is able to rise and defeat Set and reclaim the throne. Now, the story of King's father matches this well, with the father being Osiris, who didn't just die, but who also exists in this afterlife plane where he can watch over King and his people of the Boiling Isles. We talked before about how the Collector is something of a Metatron type figure, who of course we also connected to the Old Testament god. And with that god being based off of the Canaanite Baal, who was the Egyptian Set, you once again have the story of the desert god killing the Egyptian god, with the story of the Collector killing King's father. It's with his help that Luz is able to return to life, taking the last of the Titan's magic with her. This led to the epic finale where Luz has the insane power beyond what she could have imagined all the way back in episode 1, or even what she thought she would be able to tap into with her palisman. Like with the Egyptian legend, the descendant Horus, or in the Owl House King, is able to defeat the one who threatened his father's throne, Set, or in this case now, Belos, who of course has that cosmic connection to the Collector. All of this led to one of the most epic finales in TV Disney history, and really TV history I would say, with animation not just allowing for the freedom of such an epic story, but also having truly cinematic action and drama for this final episode. And unfortunately, this was the last time where Disney was making a lot of these epic cartoons that dived into similar esoteric themes. If you like this video, you'll probably like some of our others that talk about the same stuff in different shows. For instance, we put out a video breaking down Gravity Falls this year, which you know just has all sorts of secret society connections as well. Additionally, I'm always working on new videos breaking down cartoons with these themes, particularly for our early access program here on YouTube and Patreon. If we can get more support on those platforms with our monthly memberships, we'd be able to get even more of these videos out, and of course by signing up you'd get early access to all of them, so consider doing so if you really like cartoons and esoteric mythology. Elsewise, don't forget to subscribe so we can see you at the next one, as I think we're doing Star versus the Forces of Evil next. Thank you to all of our Patreon and YouTube members who supported us this month and helped us make this video. We love you to death, and we'll see you guys next time.